Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Advancing Racial Justice in Disruptive Moments of Change. My name is Dayna McField, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Community Innovators Lab, also known as CoLab, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon's webinar. Today, we will introduce the exciting work of the Community Innovators Lab, especially in this moment of racial justice, and converse with members of the MIT alumni and CoLab community to hear their perspectives on how MIT has shaped their commitment to racial and social justice. As we engage in the discussion, we invite you to add questions to the chat. We hope to bring in as many voices from the audience during the second half of our conversation. Without further delay, please join me in welcoming our panelists. Again, my name is Dayna McField, Deputy Director of MIT Community Innovators Lab. We'll also be joined by Dana Cunningham, the Executive Director of MIT CoLab, Juan Constain, the co-founder of KIPU, and Dr. Christopher Jones, the Executive Director of Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. We're delighted to have this time with you. And before we begin, we look forward to receiving opening remarks from Christopher Zegras, the head of the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. Thank you so much for joining us today, Chris.
Thank you, Dayna. I'm trying to start my video. I'm not sure if it's enabled, but it's not that important. Thank you so much, Dayna. Thanks to the panelists today. Thanks for all in attendance. It's an honor to be here to introduce the work of CoLab. As mentioned, I'm the head of the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, AKA DUSP, and I'm very lucky to be a member of this highly diverse faculty, which draws together a range of disciplines, from urban planning to anthropology to engineering, economics, law, epidemiology, and many others. While we are highly multidisciplinary and we span the globe in our research, teaching, and collaborations, we are united by a singular vision: to make the places where we all live more just, healthy, and sustainable. We aim to prepare leaders that are dedicated to improving human settlements by advancing just and equitable development, by strengthening communities and enhancing environmental conditions. Underlying all of this work is our moral imperative to confront the systemic existential threats of the day. These are racial justice, and also I want to say climate change. I'm not confounding the two, and I do not need to belabor the realities that we are experiencing and witnessing every day across the landscape of the United States and, in fact, the world. Until we fully reckon with past racial injustices and become anti-racist, actively and aggressively, in everything we do as an organization, then DUSP is failing our field and our profession. I would say the same can be said regarding climate change, and I view these two obligations as our imperatives for decolonization and decarbonization. A key element of all of this work in DUSP is CoLab. CoLab is a unique entity at MIT. It's a laboratory for action research, collaboration, and innovation with marginalized communities of color, and it's integral to everything in DUSP's mission. It provides training and deep field-based connections, reflective planning practices, and methods for self-assessment, which enhance our connectedness and our educational opportunities as they relate to every aspect of our pedagogy, from our undergraduate work to our PhD work. CoLab is unique, and thus it's also uniquely challenging for funding within the typical MIT model. And we are looking for ways to support CoLab to bring its clinical education program front and center into our own practice-oriented classes, among many other activities that you will learn more about today. We're really fortunate to have CoLab as part of the DUSP community. And I'm so grateful to now be able to pass the podium, so to speak, to Dana Cunningham, who will tell you more about CoLab's important work. And I'm really grateful for the chance to introduce CoLab to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to all who are participating in this webinar. So Chris has already mentioned the ways in which DUSP is seeking to reckon with this moment and with the imperative to more sharply focus on racial justice and to think about the ways in which planning has failed to create the conditions for more justice. So in light of that, CoLab has actually been working for the last 10 years in communities at the margins where the failures have been really sharp and explicit. I came to this work as a recovering civil rights lawyer, and after a 7-year stint in philanthropy, and I was tired of litigation and I was missing direct involvement with communities, and I was looking for ways to help communities use their own assets to shape their development. And so I founded CoLab. So we work in the Americas in countries that were touched by the Atlantic slave trade. We call this the Atlantic economy. These are places that still today, the economics and the social conditions are very much shaped by the extractive legacies of slavery. So there's multi-generational racialized poverty in those places. What is missing, what exists there actually first, is that even in the poorest communities, you find tremendous assets and creativity, kinds of genius that are willing to take on the challenges of development to fight generational poverty. But what is missing is the technical expertise to actually underlie their aspirations and their plans with credible proposals for change. So that's where CoLab comes in. So we work in places that are facing a tipping point. It's like a disruptive moment of change in which the economic and the social arrangements are shifting. New Orleans after Katrina, and when there are big policy changes, like when the stimulus package was first announced, or now with COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement. In these moments, marginalized communities often become more marginalized because they don't have the wherewithal to participate actively in recovery, in planning recovery efforts. But they have the inspiration and the genius, they just need the technical support. We call our approach innovation from the margins. This idea, using participatory action research with the community, we pair the insights of communities that have faced the sharpest edges of institutional failure and thus actually have a lot of ideas about how to reinvent institutions. We pair that with the technical expertise of MIT faculty and students, and together we create credible proposals for development. We look at equity both in terms of fairness, but also in the traditional meaning of the word in terms of ownership. And so we're looking for ways to together shape the local economy with an eye towards supporting local community-owned enterprise. Having a credible proposal with an MIT stamp on it can create the basis for unlikely alliances across sectors, business, government, community, where they can see common interests and ways of collaborating. MIT students are an extraordinary asset in collaborations with communities at the cutting edges of change. They're seeing the converging crises in the world that Chris mentioned. They're hungry to have an impact even while they're still in school. They're brilliant with strong technical skills and tons of energy, creativity, and curiosity. And so we work in places that are hotspots of change. In New Orleans, we sent 10 students to the Office of Recovery Management to help them actually write the recovery plan. We deployed 20 students to comb through the Recovery Act and find opportunities for communities to seek funding through that act. And then we work with the community leaders on their applications. And after the 2016 election, we worked to create an interactive map for activists looking to see where there was strong civic mobilization in communities, in marginalized communities. But we also work for the long term in a couple of places, in the Bronx, which is the nation's poorest urban county, in Brooklyn, which would be one of the largest Black cities in the world if it were an independent city, and in 2 cities in Colombia, in the Afro-majority Pacific region. In those places, they've been plagued by poverty and violence in the wake of drug trafficking and civil unrest. I want to talk for a minute about Brooklyn to give you a sense of actually how participatory action works and has impact on the ground. So in Brooklyn, there was a safety net hospital that was threatened with closure, and community activists came to us and said, we want an alternative. We need this hospital, not just for the access to medical care, but for the jobs and for the hospital's operation as an important economic force in the community. And so we put together a team of faculty and students, and we did participatory action research to survey the needs and the assets of the community to get a thoroughgoing understanding of the conditions. The students looked into local health data and worked with high school students and college students. They walked the streets. They learned where the green spaces were, where the healthy food stores were, where there were places where the civic and cultural organizations were. They looked at levels of resident engagement, and they also surveyed residents, clipboard in hand, day after day, finding out what the residents themselves already knew about local health conditions and practices. So honing in on local knowledge was an important piece of it, but we were also training a cadre of local students to be able to do this work in the future. And each summer since that first year, maybe 5 years ago, we've gone back and done PAR projects in specific neighborhoods in the hospital's service area to train students. We've at this point trained about 200 local students in these practices. We also created a report in that first year that highlighted the needs and assets, but also proposed a comprehensive approach, kind of a wellness empowerment zone that addressed the social determinants of health in the community based on the community's own knowledge. And that report gave local leaders the opportunity, the wherewithal to develop a successful alternative to the hospital's closure. The hospital didn't close, and instead, the report we did became the basis of an initiative by Governor Cuomo. It's called Vital Brooklyn, and he's in the process right now of investing $1.2 billion in building healthy housing, green space, deploying healthy food trucks, and other kinds of efforts to build the health status of the community. He's providing workforce development funding. During the COVID moment, the hospitals realized that the local supply chain's weaknesses were actually complicating their ability to deliver care. And we brought in a tech entrepreneur to work with the hospitals to come up with a smart logistics platform, a kind of Uber for hospital equipment that supported the hospitals in distributing equipment on demand across their facilities during the height of the pandemic. And that business, which the entrepreneur plans to have significant community ownership opportunities within, is becoming part of an emerging economic development effort that the local leaders are calling the Healthy Enterprise Hub in central Brooklyn. Students are the laboring oar of CoLab's PAR processes. So I just want to take a minute to talk about how we work with students, what we do with students. We immerse them in field-based practice in these examples to learn the skills and practices. They don't come to MIT necessarily with the wherewithal to work in collaborative ways with communities. Our projects give the students hands-on experience with learning about institutions through efforts to change institutions. We have a specific focus on addressing racial disparities. We prepare students intellectually with the theory and epistemology of collaborative knowledge creation. With the students, we are helping to democratize access to technical planning capacity. And we provide reflective practice to help give students the tools for professional self-examination throughout their lives. We're now working to build out our capacity, as Chris said, to be able to offer these kinds of opportunities for students across the Institute. After more than 10 years, we have an amazing network of alums who are putting these approaches into practice in the world. And in a minute, you're going to hear from two of them. However, first, I just want to take a minute to express some gratitude. None of this would have been possible without the generous support of the Candida Fund, the WKK Kellogg, Nathan Cummings and Robert Wood Johnson Foundations, as well as Maimonides Hospital. Philanthropic support is what powers all of these efforts. Thanks to you all for your interest in our work, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you so much, Dayna, for the introduction and context on how we arrive in this moment. At this time, I'd like to pass the mic to Juan Constain. And Juan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also share with the audience of the webinar how your time at DUSP and CoLab influenced your path towards social justice?
Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm trying to put my camera on. Just a second. Okay, here we go. So, hi, everyone, and thank you, Dayna and Dayna and everyone for this space. I'm thrilled to be here with people who I've worked with and I admire a lot, who have been very influential for my work. And also want to say hi to Chris, who I know is doing amazing work in Arkansas. So as Dayna and Dayna mentioned, my name is Juan Constain. I'm Colombian. I was trained as a city planner and as a development practitioner. I've been connected to CoLab and DUSP since 2012 when I first came as an undergraduate visiting student or intern. And since that moment, my connection to the department and CoLab has been very influential to what I've been doing now and what we're doing now with Kipu. So since 2012, I've worked in different capacities, and most of my work with CoLab has been on co-designing and implementing a series of capacity building and leadership development programs. As Dayna mentioned, our work in the Colombian Pacific region is focused around that as part of the Inclusive Regional Development Program. And in 2016, I came to CoLab to MIT to get my master's in city planning at DUSP. And during that time, I met with some amazing social entrepreneurs with a lot of experience in working in Latin America. And we co-founded Kipu with this group of values-driven entrepreneurs. This is a startup that is focused on building digital community marketplaces that can create and retain wealth in communities at the margins, while creating enough data to revolutionize how small micro entrepreneurs in informality can access capital or loans. And DUSP and CoLab in particular have played a pivotal role in shaping how Kipu operates and how we show up in the world in a moment of, as Dayna say, moments that are experiencing disruptive change. That's where Kipu was born, actually, in one of these moments of change. So on one hand, CoLab's work on economic democracy, self-determination, and harvesting innovation at the margins have really changed, on one hand, what it means to be a planner, and on the other one, a social entrepreneur with developing technology with communities at the margins. And one of the lessons there from my time at CoLab at DUSP was about the type of knowledge that we need now as society to try to face the challenges that we have. And CoLab is very keen about thinking of other ways of creating knowledge that can help us address issues that we have never faced before, the climate change, the levels of injustice and inequity around the world, polarization, all of these challenges, we had never faced them at the scale and magnitude at which we do right now. So traditional knowledge and past knowledge won't help us figure out what to do. And that was one of the key lessons is how do we co-create knowledge at the margins? We know that people who are there have experienced systemic failures in ways that better position them to fix them. And that's exactly what we are doing with Kipu. We are co-designing technology with communities at the margins to try to create tools that can help them reshape their economies, right? So MIT was also a very important place for Kipu. We call it the perfect ecosystem for Kipu to be born, because we combine that entrepreneurial spirit and that vast network of opportunities that exist at MIT with this social justice lens that we carry in our DNA because of DUSP and CoLab in particular. So we were born here at MIT as a startup that wants to create technology, we call it situated technology that really responds to what communities are facing. And in our case, after 2 years of a participatory action research process, the result is community marketplaces in which you can sell and buy using a community token while creating data that can unlock access to financial services. And we could have never done this without this mindset of tackling big challenges, structural issues with a particular lens on co-creation. So right now, after those 2 years of work, we recently launched our pilot in Barranquilla in Colombia 2 months ago almost, and we have more than 500 users, over 200 informal businesses have registered in the app and are doing transactions right now. Our purpose is that we are not providing solutions to the economic problems that communities are facing, but we're rather co-designing technology that can help them make better decisions about how their economy works. And that is, the essence of economic democracy and self-determination. We're adding a digital layer to that and testing it out here in Colombia, in Barranquilla. Our idea is to scale across Latin America over the next years, and we have a team of 5 co-founders. 3 of our co-founders went to MIT. We did the same program. We were all very close to CoLab, and we also appreciate a lot of the spaces that the department and MIT has created for entrepreneurs. We were part of the MIT DesignX Accelerator, which is housed at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning. And we also leverage a lot of know-how resources from the MIT Innovation Initiative. Overall, we were able to leverage a lot from this ecosystem and bring it to work at communities at the margins that want to redesign their economies. So we were kind of a facilitator in that process with technology. And yeah, that's how I would summarize my experience at DUSP, at CoLab, and being part of this ecosystem.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Juan, and bringing us to an international experience and the work that you're doing in Colombia. We're going to bring it a little bit closer to home now and invite Dr. Jones to talk to us a little bit about his time at DUSP and the impact it has had on the progress towards social justice. But Dr. Jones, before you begin, I'd like to reach out to our webinar community. These are unusual times and I can't see your face, even though you can see mine, but I do want you to begin to put some questions out there so this is more of a conversation after Dr. Jones speaks and less of a presentation. So we invite you into community with us after Dr. Jones gives his presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Dayna. And Juan, it's great to be on the panel with you. I love the work that you're doing, and I'm excited about partnering together. It's an honor and a privilege to share with you all today. My time at MIT was phenomenal, and I had a home in CoLab, and I'm thankful for all that CoLab has done really in bringing together the technical knowledge and background with social justice, with practical application that makes a difference in people's lives. It's kind of how I've thought about it. So I'm thankful to CoLab. I'm also very thankful to DUSP, Chris Zegras, department head. It's great to see your face. I'm going to share with you for just a few minutes my journey, because I think understanding part of my journey is helpful in understanding the role that CoLab has played in my life, and the importance of understanding social justice in moments when, as Juan mentioned, we have a number of crises coming together. So my journey, I was born in a small town in the South, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and I grew up, I grew up eating honeysuckle and fighting grasshoppers, and that's a whole nother story for a different day. And for me, I was always passionate about exploration, and I always prioritized family. So I'll take a minute and just kind of brag on my family. I have an amazing wife who's many of you may know. She's an Air Force captain, an ER doc, former Air Force captain, an ER doc, and we have 3 wonderful children. And yes, those are Go Boat stickers. So make sure you vote. It is critical. Make sure you do that. But my sort of journey from Pine Bluff led me to Morehouse. And I was there on a NASA scholarship. That's Franklin Chang Diaz, also an MIT graduate, who I had the fortunate opportunity to intern under. But at Morehouse, I studied physics and math. And that's part of where my interest in social justice began to come alive. And from there, I journeyed over to MIT, where I was in the nuclear engineering department in technology and policy. And after I finished my 2 masters, taught high school for a year, but then came back as assistant dean. And that was actually my first introduction to DUSP and CoLab from a non-student perspective. And it was absolutely phenomenal. And then during that time, I joined MIT as a PhD student. And there's a picture there. And I had the fortune of being a part of DUSP. My PhD was focused on discrimination in large-scale energy systems. So I looked at the Tennessee Valley Authority, and this relates to what Dayna was talking about how massive investment can lead to greater equity or greater disparities. But while I was there, I was able to do a number of outstanding things. I loved working with DUSP and CoLab and people at the margin, and was always motivated by the work that was being done there. But this map really shook me to my core. It's a map that lays out a heat map of innovation. Now, the proxy they used was inventions as a proxy for innovation. We can get into whether or not that's an appropriate proxy. But what you see is a big gap right where I'm from. And I've always wanted to come home. I've always had a desire to come back home. And at the same time, understanding this gap is what really ignited me. And so I came back home, and I'm now the executive director of the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. And we are able to really apply a lot of the principles that I learned in DUSP to the work that we're doing now. Our mission at the Innovation Hub is improving the lives of Arkansans by inspiring innovation and expanding opportunity. And our vision is really what you hear from DUSP and CoLab all the time. Like, how do we create a world where demographic identifiers and geographic location don't tell you what the outcome will be? And that's our vision. We offer a number of things from, pre-COVID. We offer a number of things from co-working space to educational supports to business support to product supports in terms of design and manufacturing and prototyping. A couple of examples of what we are working on now, solar array project we're working on. And interestingly, this idea is something that was birthed from my time in DUSP. We have things like welding apprenticeship programs and a number of other apprenticeship programs at the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. And we care about the community. We want to understand what's happening on the ground in the community. And these are just 2 examples. The picture of the device is actually something that was made by a member at a corporation here in Arkansas. And he retrofitted a fishing reel so that his brother, who did not have use of his hands, could use it. And we helped him prototype it and design it at the Innovation Hub. And what I love is this graphic you see of the kids on the sidewalk. Again, this is pre-COVID. It's a 3D rendering of a crosswalk to help to slow down traffic. And then COVID hit, and we made a pivot in COVID. And one of the things that I love about having spent time in DUSP and at CoLab is the leaning into big problems and the understanding that you appreciate the historical context, but you apply it to the today. And so we made 2 pivots. One was focused on digital literacy, and we listened to folks that were closest to the challenges and understood that what families needed was an understanding of how to utilize the online tools that their students had access to now, with all schools going virtual. And these are just some quick examples of how we're deploying digital literacy. The other piece that we really focused in on was something called the Arkansas Maker Task Force. When COVID hit, a big problem was PPE and matching PPE to demand. And so and there was a supply chain issue. And what we realized was there's a lot of capacity on the ground. People had 3D printers in their home. People know how to sew, and it's really distributed, and it was not tapped into the supply chain. So we created the task force to match local supply of PPE with local demand of PPE. And through the task force is an example of what we made a part of a face shield, faster fulfillment, shorter supply chain. But so far, and this graphic is a little bit old, we've been able to deliver over 13,000 units of PPE to a number of places throughout Arkansas, but also beyond Arkansas. And you'll even see that the circle there is Navajo Nation that we were able to deliver PPE to. This PPE was made locally, matched locally, but the demand, of course, was beyond local. So our local solution, which was helpful and beneficial, had larger global applications. And we also created an online tracking system that maps it to, that's a GIS mapping to really understand where the supply and demand are, when it's fulfilled, and so on and so forth. And the last thing that we are doing as a part of it is creating a series of youth cohorts across the state so that youth who have skills or have interest in skills, again, like 3D printing, laser cutting, sewing, they can not only make the PPE to fulfill local demand, but they can also learn about entrepreneurship. And I'll end by saying the significance of DUSP and CoLab. Some of the things that really rang true for me and stood out is the push to having a historical analysis, to not be ahistorical in any analysis. The drive towards theory rigor, so being very rigorous in any theory that we are applying. The practical grounding that is taught there really still resonates with me. If we're going to have a solution, what does it mean for the folks that it's intended to impact, which then leads to a focus on people over anything else. You solve problems, you create technology, you create solutions, but at the end of the day, it's for people. And CoLab and DUST really taught me that agency, we have agency and it matters. We can make a difference and it does matter. And the last thing I'll say is that during my time there were a number of discussions about the significance of being a planner, and has the planning field died? There's never a better time to be a planner than now. The problems are large. They have never been solved before. They are extremely complex and interrelated. And we have been taught as planners the skills necessary to solve these problems. So with that, I will turn the mic back over to you, Dayna.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. This has been great, and thank you to everyone who has already started to send in their questions. We invite more questions at this moment, and before we move on, we have a question for Juan that we'd like you to answer live. Can you provide some more information on Kipu, how it works?
Great, thank you, Dayna, and thank you for those very good questions. I think it's easier if I share screen for just a couple minutes, just to show how we developed this technology and what are we doing now. So the first thing is, we're place-based. This is a place-based work, and we're planners. 3 of our 5 co-founders were planners. And we work in places where informality is concentrated, right? So we work in informal settlements where 1 out of every 4 Latin American lives, and the majority of the economy is informal. And this number is rising a lot because of the COVID crisis also. So what this means is there are very strong place-based informal economies, and that's where we work. We work with micro entrepreneurs that run businesses from their homes, such as Rafael, Julia, Juan, and they are not connected to the formal systems of the economy. They don't have any stability. They're more vulnerable to economic crisis. And after a PAR research process that we made, we landed on 3 main barriers that these micro entrepreneurs were having. One is a lack of information and visibility. These home-based workers are not digitally visible, yet they sustain the whole neighborhood economy. Second, that there's a cash flow problem, and there's not enough fiat currency to trade, which means that whenever there's not enough cash, transactions will stop. And this is an issue in places where structural poverty also has, there are structural poverty traps. And third was a problem of access to capital. They cannot access capital to grow their businesses. And most of the people in Colombia access financial services informally, and those who can do it will do it under very unjust conditions. And then COVID happens, and we called it an emergency on top of another emergency. These places were already experiencing some type of economic emergency. Now COVID is really threatening their livelihoods. And they have two assets, and here comes the asset-based framework that CoLab also brings is what the communities of the margins already have. And in the case of the community where we're working is high levels of connectivity and a strong social tissue. We're very strong, they accumulate a lot of social capital. And that's where we came in and built this digital community marketplaces for informal micro businesses where they can sell and buy locally without using money. They can use this trading system and build credit worthiness while they do that. Our name is inspired by this ancestral technology that the Incas used to keep records and bookkeeping, hundreds of years, thousands of years ago, and we are inspired by that. So our marketplace, let me show you, our marketplaces have built in the features of informality. So we know that in informality there, for example, there are no fixed prices. Everyone wants to negotiate a price. So we built that into our marketplaces. People are afraid of showing their address because they are afraid of taxation. They're afraid of being punished by selling products from their home when they're not licensed to do so. So we added 3 different options of registering your address. We included things like being able to do promotions or sales to specific people as the neighborhood economy usually works. So we built all of this into the design of how our marketplaces work. And so far in the process, we started in 2018. Right now we have more than 400 registered users. Almost, needs to be updated. Almost 200 businesses have been created. More than 300 transactions are happening, and 70% of our users are women who run businesses from their homes, who are never visible digitally for the economy. And that's how our marketplaces operate on the front end. On the back end, we're cultivating this massive ecosystem of data about informality. And we're not selling that data. We're not giving access to that data, but we're using it to design better services, financial services for these micro entrepreneurs. That's kind of the model that we're running. We're working in one community in Barranquilla in Colombia. Hopefully we'll have 3 more in Barranquilla by the end of the year. And we're expanding in Colombia and in Latin America with partners on the ground. We're not parachuting into communities that we don't have a partner that has legitimacy, trust, and that has built a lot of social capital there. That's also very important in our model. And I'll put some links on the chat so if folks are interested in following up.
Thank you so much, Juan. We've had 2 great questions that I want to turn over to Dayna Cunningham to answer regarding how does CoLab select its partners and where it works? And also, can you talk a little bit more about the advantages and disadvantages of doing work related to racial justice?
Sure. So CoLab selects its partners basically by who comes to us. So we are often approached by leaders in communities who are working on an institutional change project and are looking for technical support. And so we have to have partners who are sophisticated, who can, in a sense, supervise our research to make sure that it lands in the community in a way that is helpful and grounded in the community context. So and we have at this point, we have a network of collaborators that we've been working with for over a decade. And a lot of our work at this point comes through that network. One of the reasons we like partnering with people over time is because we think the questions become more interesting and sophisticated. There's more sort of meat to chew on for the students. And the trust with our partners allows us to get into kind of deeper collaborations. And the second question, remind me what the second question was?
Hey, Dayna, before you answer the second question,
yeah,
I just formally say that we are inviting you to Arkansas. We have an informal relationship and it's great, but we are formally inviting you to Arkansas. We need you down here to join with us.
Got it.
Thank you so much. And the second question is, can the panelists talk more about the advantages, disadvantages, impacts of their work's relationship with MIT as an institute beyond the lab or the department?
Yeah. And so that's a great question. So I would say a couple. The greatest advantage is, of course, that MIT is just, you know, a treasure box of technical capacity. And so when we had a project that involved logistics in informal trash picking enterprises, we could go to the Center for Transportation Logistics. When we worked in Colombia in the Amazon on a climate disaster project, we could collaborate with the MIT Environmental Sustainability Initiative. And so we're always looking for and finding tremendously great partners across the Institute. Somebody asked about, I believe it was Fab Lab, and actually we prototyped a fabrication lab, nothing at the scale of what Chris Jones is doing, but we prototyped a fabrication lab in the Bronx, and on that we actually partnered with the Fab Lab just to understand what are the specs for putting together a lab that would be useful as an educational tool in the Bronx. And so there's just, I mean, I could go on and on about the advantages of being at MIT. There are two disadvantages. The biggest one for us is because our basic approach is community knowledge co-creation, we are sometimes stymied in collaborating with partners who think that MIT has all of the answers. And what we're trying to get at is it has to be a partnership between you and us to really make workable solutions in specific contexts. And so it takes time to build up the trust and confidence of our partners to be able to step forward and say, well, this is actually how I think it should go. And that's one of the reasons why we're looking for, you know, partners who are established, who have some sophistication and some confidence to move forward on their proposals. I want to sneak in something about the online and offline piece. I saw that question come through, if I may. So CoLab was very focused on in-person, on-the-ground work. We have offices in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, and we have team members in the Pacific region of Columbia who live there, work there, in all of these places. And a lot of our work in the Brooklyn story that I told you about was very much about working with communities as they mobilize themselves in protest, in government meetings, really person-to-person, intense collaboration. And then COVID hit. And so we are actually working feverishly to transition to a virtual environment. And we had luck in that we have been practicing. We actually have, one of our projects is with the Global Alliance on Banking with Values. That's a global network. They do a lot of stuff virtually. And we had been developing an open course online for bankers to develop their capacity to do micro lending and other kinds of work with marginalized communities. And that work we had deliberately designed as having an online component where we would have kind of substantive classwork and discussion, and then an offline component where participants were encouraged to meet together, to work together in person, and then actually even to participate in the online part in person. And so we are now saying in this moment, you actually have to do it all. You have to be ready to develop virtual capacities and networks, and you have to be able to do the work of trust building and kind of deep sharing and collaboration. It can't just be like meeting space. You really have to learn how to build relationships online. And we've developed a lot of interesting techniques. I can, if anybody is interested, I can follow up more offline on how to do that. So we think both are absolutely necessary.
Thank you, Dayna. I want to try to squeeze two more questions in there. Dr. Jones, can you take the question that's in there? What are some of the metrics you use when determining the impact of specific programs you've initiated?
Yeah, thanks for that question. It's a really good one. And at the end of the day, when we seek to engage in some way with the community to solve a problem, we start by saying, what's the impact we want to make, and how do we measure that impact? So, for example, with the digital literacy project, one metric is engagement. How engaged are parents? Because we know from the spring, there were a number of parents who were not engaged in the learning process of their students because it was virtual and because it was confusing. So we look at engagement. For the PPE production, we look at things like fulfillment. To what extent is the demand met, and to what extent is it met locally? What's the number of entrepreneurs that grow from meeting that local demand? So it really varies from project to project. We're Arkansas's first makerspace. So we have a number of different projects in the makerspace area, and we're heavily involved in education. At the end of the day, though, we are looking at, in terms of a big metric, to what extent are Arkansans who have traditionally been left out of things like entrepreneurship and 21st century tools, to what extent are they now engaged? So.
Thank you so much. And the last question, Juan, I know you answered in the chat, but I think the entire audience would benefit from the live answer. Can you share with us a little bit more about the physical communities and the digital communities? Can you talk about the unique nature of the work and how that shows up for people, especially in the economies that you're working in?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Bernard, for that question. So yeah, our work is place-based. So we are trying to add a digital layer to an economy that is place-based and that has very specific conditions in cities, and they're often marginalized. So, Dayna said that there's a need to combine both, virtual or digital and physical and in person. In our case, we were lucky enough to be able to carry out an 18-month process working with the community in territory, having workshops with them, turning some of those community members into researchers and helping us do, collaborative consumption and production mapping. And all of this co-design process, we're doing it on the ground. And our solution, or our technology, our platform, is built to kind of mirror a lot of the habits and a lot of the things you see physically on the neighborhood. We're not trying to transform all of these behaviors. We're trying to find a way that technology can accelerate them, can facilitate more transactions, can help these businesses make better decisions also. So it's a combination of both, but our model is highly contingent on being able to be on the ground. And we faced some challenges because of COVID and not being able to be there right when we were about to launch. So we turned into an all digital campaign, trying to engage people, trying to, have tutorials and, materials for people to come on board. And it was very successful. We were shocked by how receptive people were. We were not able to meet with them in person, yet we had multiple ways of engaging with them. So, it's about being flexible. I think we had a lot of assumptions of how our field work was going to be, and we built a lot of plans around it. And then COVID hit, we need to switch to a different type of interaction, but the trust was already there. We were visualizing their economy digitally. There's this concept in theory that we will helping the system see itself. So now that you see this whole ecosystem of micro entrepreneurs in one place, that helps people get on board and understand the value of local production and consumption. So in our case, we were kind of jumping between digital and physical all the time and making sure that we don't fall into that trap of like techno-solutionism, and is that this technology will solve all of the problems for this community. No, this is just a tool. People are making better decisions about how their economy works using this tool. And that's the kind of goal we're hoping with this digital physical interaction.
Thank you so much for that, Juan. We just want to thank everyone again for coming out to this webinar and sharing in this conversation with us. We know that conversations about inequity, the challenges of economic democracy, of climate change, of achieving all of the issues that we've been talking about around social justice did not begin with COVID, and it did not begin with the Black Lives Matter movement. So I want to give our panelists a moment to have some closing remarks. As we close out this session, what are we leaving with our MIT alumni community? And also, if you can take a moment after you respond to type your contact info in the Q&A chat, so everyone knows how to reach you after this conversation. So again, thank you so much. And we will begin with Dayna, and then go to Juan, and then close out with Dr. Jones.
Thank you. Again, thanks to all who participated and who are interested in our work. I just got a question in the chat about the risk of communities losing power right now because the idea of innovation districts is becoming widespread. And so I want to say that there is such a deep reserve of intelligence and innovation in communities. And I think that we have not done enough as professionals to really support and leverage that asset for development in a way that makes everyone's work easier, because there is so much to build from. And so I just want to encourage all of us in this moment where many are looking for ways to contribute, to not overlook the ways in which communities that may have been invisible, that are really suffering from the impacts of recent events of COVID and of police violence, actually can play a really big role in their own solutions with our support. So thank you again. Urge you to go to our website and get a look at the more detail about what we're doing, and hope to see you again sometime.
Well, this has been a very, very inspirational hour for me, and hearing about how we are all responding to a moment of uncertainty. I think my reflection is around that. These are very uncertain times, and we need bold ideas and bold actions. And those cannot be pre-designed or preconceived before going to a community. And that's part of, it's in our DNA, because we are CoLabers and we, been very close to this way of working. But it usually comes with, with being at MIT and being able to see this whole wealth of, resources that you think you can tackle any problem in the world, and you might be able to do that, but you need the expertise that's there. And it's kind of shaking off that idea of being the expert when a lot of the knowledge for what we need to solve hasn't been created yet. So everyone's an expert on how to get out of what we've gotten ourselves into. That would be my message.
Well, I echo the thanks for you all putting this panel on, and the thanks for people participating. It's truly been an honor for me and an inspiration. I'm even more inspired now to lean in, and I think while I underscore everything that was said, the only piece that I would add is that it's incumbent upon us to lean in. As challenging as this moment may be, in these challenging moments and in these times of crisis, opportunity can emerge. And what I learned in my time in DUSP and at CoLab was to look for opportunities in the spaces that people don't typically look for, whether that be marginalized communities that have traditionally been marginalized, those individuals at the margins, expertise on the ground, you name it, but to look for opportunities in spaces that you haven't traditionally looked for them. And that's what I take with me. That's what I'm re-energized by. That's what I hope you all lean into. The kind of closeout, I would say, for me, is to let's do it together. We can't solve these problems alone. We can't solve these problems in small communities. It's incumbent upon us to build the networks and the nodes and to leverage those networks and nodes and do it together. And I offer myself to anyone who needs me to lean in with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of today's panelists and speakers. Thank you to our department head, Chris Zegers, for coming in with the opening remarks. This work is not possible without all of the amazing efforts of the CoLab team on the ground. Although Dayna and I are here to speak with you today, we have an amazing staff that works very hard in community, in partnership day to day, and we could not do this work without them. So we thank you on behalf of the entire CoLab team, our faculty at council, our community advisory board, for coming out to hear and learn a little bit more about our work today. This webinar also would not have been possible without the amazing support of the MIT team. I don't want them to be embarrassed, but we want to thank Lori, Moana, Emily, Lizzie, all of the people who help to make this happen today. We could not have done it without your support and your guidance. Everyone who I may have named or not named, we thank you. And if you have any questions, I'd like to just end in the last few minutes in silence by just scrolling through the PowerPoint slides that contains all of the contact information that was shared by the panelists so that you can have access for anyone that you want to follow up with. That information will be on the screen for you. So I'll make sure that we share screen right now and give you an opportunity to copy that down. So have a great day. Thank you for joining us. And we appreciate you as you continue to work in the fight towards racial justice and equity.